Welcome to Open Studio Night, our fourth year in a row that we're doing this event. I'm Jay Rosen, director of the Studio 20 program at NYU. I have a little background for you on this program and what's going to be happening tonight. Studio 20 is the world's only graduate program in journalism focused exclusively on innovation. We do project-based learning. We do it with partners in the media business. Some are big, established media companies. Some are small, struggling startups. The program is 16 months, fall, spring, summer, fall, and as the students here can tell you, it's a lot of work. I sometimes describe Studio 20 as a consulting group that gets paid in problems, but they have to be good problems. By that we mean, let's do something new that we don't really know how to do. A good problem is a practical puzzle that our partners find urgent, that others in journalism would also recognize. It should have a lot in it, and of course it should be fun, challenging, interesting to our students. What you will see tonight is a presentation on 13 projects, which means 13 problems and 13 partners, many of whom are represented here tonight. We also have family and friends of our graduating students here. We have people from the journalism world in New York who support our program. We have faculty from other J schools in the city, which is very collegial of them. Each student gets 5 minutes to present her project. They've been practicing and honing these presentations for weeks, and they're all graduating this week. A few of them have jobs already, which we're very proud of, but most of them need jobs, so if you are in a position to help, please do. We also have the next group of Studio 20 students coming right behind them the year after. Those people, raise your hands, okay? And by the summer of 2015, they will all need projects to work on themselves, so keep that in mind as well. If you have a news organization, a media company, a startup that you run, and you have a good problem, then donate it to us, and we'll return something very valuable to you. Finally, after the students present, Josh Benton, the director of Harvard's Nieman Lab, will do his annual slideshow, The Year in Innovation, which highlights the most important things that happened this year for people like us who are trying to move journalism forward. We'll try to finish by around 8 o'clock. After that, some of you might have to go, but you're welcome to stay and drink with us because our students will be celebrating, and you can be part of that. This event is public. It's open for tweeting. The hashtag, as you can see, is Studio 20. There is a live stream for the event, which you can get the link for off my Twitter feed if you want to. And we're almost ready for our first presenter, Keng, who is going to take the stage momentarily, like now. Keng, are you ready?
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Thanks, Jay. My name is Keng. So today, data journalism has become a buzzword in the media industry, and many newsrooms are scrambling to use data in their stories. However, it doesn't mean everybody can produce good data journalism. Let's have a look at my favorite charts. I'm not sure cutting a head into slices helps to present data. And I'm pretty sure chart does not help when your math is wrong. So how do we avoid all these bad charts? Of course, we need people who know data journalism in the newsroom. However, currently the way to produce data journalism is very resource intensive. Big newsrooms like New York Times have over 1,200 editorial staff. And the graphic departments that produces data components alone has about 40 people. But for small newsroom like my partner, Foreign Policy, The whole newsroom has only 40 people, equals to just one department in the Times. So there's this huge gap in the industry. To narrow this gap, I developed Data N. Data N is a program that lowers the barrier for small newsrooms to integrate data journalism into their daily operation. It helps them to produce credible, engaging, and comprehensible journalism. Together with foreign policy, we developed training modules, we selected and customized a set of tools, and we prepared documentation for each tool. We integrated all these materials into an internal training website that the journalists can refer to when they need to work with data. So here's a quick view of what we have built. This is the website that has all the tools and documentation. And for open source tool like Data Wrapper, we customize the colors, the fonts, and the size, so the journalists, they don't have to do it manually every time they need to build a chart. We also built specialized data visualization tools for foreign policy, and this is one of them. And each of these tools, we prepare step-by-step instruction and documentation for them. So besides tools, we also have guidelines on data visualization, like which chart to choose, what do you want to present, and how we build this program. First, we ask the journalists, what do they need, and what problems they are facing. And most of them told us two major problems. First is time, and the second is how to visualize data. So with this feedback in mind, we designed and ran the project. Tonight, I just want to share two key findings in this project. The first is flexible and customized modules. In a small newsroom, we know time is an issue. It is extremely hard to gather everyone at the same time for training. So we broke our training materials into small pieces that can be mixed and matched into different modules for different groups of journalists. And we conducted quick and short training sessions in small groups for the journalists. The second is tool. Journalists are not only busy, most of them, they don't like coding. So we need to select tools that are easy to use, that require minimal time, they don't require coding skill, and can be customized to fit the house style, and will be frequently used in future stories. After the training, some of the journalists put the tools and skills to work almost immediately. Here are some examples. From the feedback that we conducted after the training, out of 13 journalists we trained, almost half said they have learned something useful. 4 said they still have questions, which I think is good. And 3 of them felt that it was too basic. That's even better. 90% of the journalists were interested to have more advanced training. I think that's a very, very good feedback. From here, we can also see that a one-time training is never enough. We need long-term support for the journalists. And that's something I want to develop after this program. Data N is not just designed for foreign policy. It can be applied to small newsrooms, not just in the US, but other parts of the world. It lowers the barrier to produce data journalism. It accelerates the development of data journalism in the newsroom. I believe every newsroom should have its own data N. So if you want to build a data N for your newsroom, I am more than happy to help. You can visit my blog for more details about the program. I want to thank Emma, Ben, Jay, Zoe, all my classmates in Studio 20, and of course, my wife, Lily. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Keng. Keng is a Fulbright scholar. He comes to us from Malaysia, and his project is a good example of a problem that Foreign Policy Magazine had, but that many other sites would have it as well. And as a matter of fact, I was on the phone this week with somebody else who runs a newsroom who was asking me, do you think he could do what he did for them, for us? So you see how these projects work. Monica, are you ready?
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Hello. My name is Monica, and I'm here to explain all your tomorrows. The star date is 2014, and digital identity providers like Facebook and OkCupid are using our data to decide what we should read, who we should love, and ultimately who we should be. These data-centric technologies, what we call big data, are affecting us all, but the process is hard to see because it's intangible. It's happening on computers behind closed NSA doors in an algorithm. Too often, big data gets represented by media as binary code running across the screen. As journalists, it's our job to make the complex accessible, and we need more tools than talking heads and zeros and ones to make our audiences care. My project was to try one such tool: science fiction. We've already seen this work today. In the 1960s, sci-fi didn't put a man on the moon, but sci-fi helped people believe that humans could get there. Sci-fi makes the abstract real. Its famous symbols, like robots and cyberspace surveillance, are physical projections of a culture's anxieties and hopes. So let's go one step further and report in sci-fi's language and create alternate realities to critique our own. Some media organizations already understand that sci-fi can go where our current reporting can't. MIT Tech Review and New Scientist commission sci-fi stories inspired by the science in their magazines. Vice's Terraform is the latest sci-fi vertical that wants to be different than those that came before. It wants to make sci-fi a part of its weekly news cycle, placing news about Uber alongside a dystopia about Uber's ultimate takeover. In my attempt to make the complex future of big data feel more real, I partnered with Data and Society, a think-do institute, and partnered with one of their fellows, Gideon Litchfield, and we decided to try reporting from the future. One example. This past August, the Washington Post did a story on the legal consequences of driverless cars. In response, I used a Twitter to make a story and headlines that use their research to report on a possible future. New York Times, in Florida, first automated car accident brings questions of doubt. Slate, yes, we should have seen this coming. New York Post, killer cars. I realized that if you want to make data fiction relevant to the news cycle, you need to go where people get their news: social media. I chose to host my sci-fi and social platforms to see if my stories could provoke a conversation that could get reblogged and remade better in collaboration. The most successful responses were the ones that took my scenarios as a jump-off point to discuss their own current fears and hopes for big data. An ongoing problem in media and sci-fi is how to explain technologies that don't exist yet for a current audience. One solution I tried was by writing a fictional business newsletter in Quartz's format, which, like the New York Times headlines, is a recognizable style readers can use to understand the unknown. Although my news events were fiction, my hyperlinks were to current issues, creating resonances between the present and my imagined future. The point of my project is not to predict the future, but to change it, by getting you all to think critically about what these technologies can do to us. My stories are an antidote against apathy. You can only care if you see it, if you see how high the stakes are. My fictional universes, images, Twitter essays, dystopian newsletters, and headlines are all trying to help you get it, and awaken you to the fact that this isn't a world far, far away, it's already here. Because big data is a topic that affects everyone, and yet is among the hardest to make human. Science fiction puts a human face to the algorithm, and lets you understand a world that hasn't happened yet. As journalists, we should consider every tool at our disposal, and in sci-fi can help someone care about big data, we should try it. Because sci-fi and journalism share a same goal. We want stories, not data sets. Special thanks to my partner Gideon and Data and Society. Thanks to my Studio 20 family and my other family. If you want to talk about the future or find me online or come find me after.
Thank you, Monica. Here's what I love about Monica's project. There are some things which, by the time they happen, it's too late for democracy to do anything about them. And that's the problem that she was trying to tackle in this project, is to bring a possible future close enough to us in the present that we could actually debate it before it's too late. Maria, are you ready?
Yes.
Take it away.
Good evening. I'm here to tell you about a platform that can drive more traffic to your site than Twitter, Reddit, and LinkedIn combined. A decade into the social media revolution, fatigue has set in. There are lots of ways to interact, but still only 24 hours in a day. What social media network is worth your time? Well, for a growing number of publications, Pinterest is making the cut. 22% of Americans visit the site monthly. People pin and share articles and pictures like you might pin magazine clippings to a bulletin board. Once you've decided that Pinterest is right for your organization, the problem that remains is how to use the platform to engage readers. Thankfully, 83% of Pinterest users would prefer to follow a favorite brand than a favorite celebrity. Now let me present you to my partner. Entertainment Weekly is your informed friend in the room who always has a comment about the latest pop culture news. It is a publication that understands the challenges of journalism in the internet landscape. While we would all like to have readers come directly to our site, we must go where the users are. EW recognizes Pinterest as an ideal channel on which to distribute content. Pinterest provides a viable audience for Entertainment Weekly because it reaches their core demographic. 83% of people who use Pinterest are women, and 45% are between the ages of 35 and 54. Women make up 63% of EW's readers, and the median age is 41. We knew that this created an opportunity and hoped to capitalize on it. On Pinterest, people are primarily interested in a few big areas: food, DIY, home decorating, holidays, and fashion. One of the challenges that we face is that we are an entertainment brand, not a lifestyle brand. People are not necessarily looking for reviews and articles in that environment, therefore making it harder to break through. After learning the basics, we wanted to experiment with some different ways of engaging our audience. We decided to leverage our following on Instagram and posted a call out for costume submissions on Halloween. We received about a dozen photos. While the photos do not link back to our site, it was an important exercise in audience engagement. It furthered our relationship with readers and got them to interact with us in a more personal way. We also experimented with live pinning. Now, when I say that we live pinned an event, we did not send a social media editor to take amateur photos of the musical performances or red carpet arrivals. Keeping to the visual standards of the magazine, we pinned high-quality images as they streamed in. Our followers were able to repin photos of their favorite moments and read about them on our site later. Borrowing from previously successful Instagram takeovers, we would have liked to have influential guest pinners as well. Creating a group board on which to publish fan photos or other user-generated content is another idea we would have liked to try. Now I would like to share with you some tips for best practices that I've learned through research and my own trial and error. Pinterest is simple. Like any social media platform, frequency is key. Pin often. We use a tool called Curate and scheduled pins every 15 minutes. Rich pins are enhanced pins that showcase more information. The article version details the author, article title, description, web URL, and still contains a call to action. Pin it, send it, like. Pinterest connects to Facebook and Twitter and enables users to automatically post to their newsfeed or Twitter feed. It saves the user time and puts more eyes on your content. Remember that your captions count as well. In keeping with the tone of your organization, experiment with witty, sometimes even funny captions. Keep your images eye-catching and pinnable. Long pins that are taller and vertical will look better on mobile and tablets. When I started in September of this year, we had 18,560 followers. The account had not been verified and resources had not been allocated to give it the time and attention it needed to succeed. As of December 7th, we have 20,064 followers. That is a growth of 7.5% since September. We've gained more than 1,000 followers just since November 3rd. It had previously taken over 2 months to add that many followers. I've doubled the growth rate. In the last 3 months, the total interactions have gone up by 28%, and potential impressions have gone up 214%, totaling 36.7 million. Lots of people use Pinterest to discover and save things they want to read. In fact, more than 5 million articles are pinned every day. Article pins help writers and media organizations reach new audiences, get more referral traffic, and extend the lifespan of their content. On Pinterest, stories remain click-worthy and discoverable long after they've been published. I'd like to thank Melissa Mayertz, Matt Bean, Eric Gortz, Chris Ratcliffe, Ben Foskovich, Allison Toner, Jay, Zoe, and the rest of the Studio 20 class. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maria. Maria chose the last class of the semester to reveal to us that she had actually enrolled in a competing journalism program, showed up at the orientation for this one, and switched at the last minute because she just liked the vibe. That was a pretty cool moment, wasn't it? Ronan and Ellie, are you ready?
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Starting a newsroom is hard, and starting a newsroom without any funding is harder than you can imagine. With very little experience and limited resources in the media industry, Juicy Wu, the founder of Yumei, faced tremendous challenges to build up a functional newsroom from scratch. So we offer to help. Our partner, Yumei US, is a startup non-profit organization publishing a bilingual magazine and a website. Their mission is to help female Chinese immigrants deal with their challenges and thrive in the US. Our project, Bootstrap U, is a package of solutions that helps to boot up startup digital newsroom and lay a solid foundation for its future growth. Building up a brand new newsroom is a bold idea and a rocky road. Inevitably, there will be various challenges and problems in front of Yumei, but we are confident in tackling them one by one. We introduced a problem list, which listed all the challenges you may face, then ranked them by urgency, importance, and difficulty. We start fixing some easy but very important ones.
First, Yumei is staffed with volunteers from across the country, therefore does not have an office, which makes it more convenient for editors to work from home, but much harder for them to communicate and collaborate. To solve that problem, we introduced Trello, an online project management tool that keeps you updated with all the progress and tasks, and we saved the editors from constantly getting emails, phone calls, and text messages, and we helped Josie better monitor the whole team. Second, Yumei's website hasn't been updated at all since June. The editors prioritized the magazine and Slack on the website. The team was not quite familiar with digital production and didn't know where to begin. The most feasible way to bring the website to life is to diversify the source by adding aggregated content. We have created Yumei's River of News and have been working closely with our newly hired digital editor to develop a brand new workflow. We are also experimenting with multimedia production routine and providing tutorials for the team to quickly grasp the core skills. Yumei's online presence underwent a complete makeover. Next, there is a huge time gap in between two editions of the magazine, which can lead to a decrease in audience engagement. We believe one effective solution is to hold a local event where our readers who share the same experience can find and talk to each other, and ideally build up a community of Chinese female immigrants. On October the 18th, we flew to Midland, Michigan to help Yumei host the first ever local event, a winter gardening workshop. Three notable things we have accomplished were, first, we got direct feedback from our audience. Second, a growing subscription list. And third, we've created a series of email newsletter template for future use.
In talking about future, we believe an informative website is crucial for Yumei's growth. As for now, Yumei's website is not flexible enough, the CMS is not editor-friendly, and has major flaws. Currently, we are experimenting with different website building platforms and redesigning the website in a more user-friendly way. We believe WordPress could be a more practical and accessible tool for the editorial team. The editors will be able to publish and update articles as easy as writing blogs. We will relaunch the website in the near future. Also, funding is a matter of life and death. However, how to raise money remains a huge challenge. Therefore, we want to launch a crowdfunding campaign. We studied different fundraising platforms and decided to use Rezu, which is designed to make nonprofit organizations' funding easy and engaging. We also produced a video for UMA's first fundraising campaign.
We need your help so we can help more Chinese women. Your donation will make a difference.
These are only part of the problems we've solved, and we are approaching to the point where we'll solve enough problems to support UMA running on its own. We firmly believe UMA's cause, and the potential extends far beyond what we envision. For any new startup like UMA, producing high-quality content is important, but there's a lot more than that to move the newsroom forward. It's about gathering the people, selecting the tools, creating a workflow, and producing for your audience. Every step matters, and every solution you are looking for is in Bootstrap U. We appreciate Juicy's courage and entrepreneurial spirit. We would love to see more media startups grow and thrive. Bootstrap U is our care and support for new startups, and we encourage you to share yours. Special thanks to Jay, Zoe, Juicy, and our classmates for your amazing support. If you want to know more, please visit our website. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ronan and Ellie. This is one of my favorite projects of the year. As all of you know, for generations, people have come from the middle of the country to New York to make their way in journalism. So in this project, we decided to reverse it. People from New York here to learn about new ways of doing journalism, going to Michigan to help in a sort of a digital journalism Peace Corps way. So I'm very proud of these two students for doing that. Sarah?
Yep,
Are you ready?
we are ready.
Sarah and Kylie, take it away.
Today, half of all U.S. adults have mobile devices that connect to the web. 62% of these mobile users consume news from their devices. As the use of mobile increases, there is a lack of understanding in the journalism industry on how to optimize content for the mobile platform while delivering a cohesive voice. To address this problem, we created the Little Screen Project, a guide on how repeatable short-form videos interact with social media outlets to establish brand awareness, user engagement, and a consistent voice across verticals. We decided to partner with the Huffington Post because they are a popular site with a large mobile audience that has built up their following. They have more than 50 verticals across their site, and we wanted to help them find a way to tie them together through the production of short, fun, shareable videos. Going into the project, we had assumptions about social media that we wanted to test. So we produced 8 short-form videos and experimented with the editing software, content, and length. We have been posting these videos on Huffington Post Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Vine accounts and have branded them with the hashtag HuffPostToGo. We looked at likes, shares, and other social media analytics. But we also know these aren't the only determining factors, so we conducted surveys with HuffPo readers. And here's what we found. We experimented with different video editing tools, both mobile apps and professional editing software. We thought editing on your mobile phone would be simpler and save time, but we actually found the opposite. We edited this packing video for the travel vertical in the iMovie app on an iPhone. It took 2 hours to complete. We edited this DIY video in Premiere, and it took only 1 hour. We found that mobile editing apps like iMovie take longer to use. It is difficult to customize text, audio, and dimensions because you are constrained by the template. So instead, we recommend you use a professional editing software like Premiere or Final Cut.
We also experimented with the amount of information included in the videos. For example, the first Instagram video included 3 tips and a link to the site at the end. The second video focused on 1 tip. We thought it was interesting to see how this affected driving traffic back to the site versus social media engagement. The packing video, which was more of a preview of the link to the site, received more traffic back than the DIY video. But the DIY video, which was digestible on its own, did significantly better in terms of likes and engagement on Instagram. We looked at quality. We thought that high-quality videos would increase engagement. We tested this by filming one with an iPhone and one with a DSLR. This is a clip of a video we filmed with the iPhone for the Healthy Living vertical.
Hello?
And this is a clip of a video we filmed with a DSLR for the politics vertical.
What is it, Governor Cuomo, right? Yeah, okay.
My governor would be Chris Christie in New Jersey.
Governor Andrew Cuomo.
No. Is this gonna get nowhere?
So we recognize the videos contain different content, but we found that even though the sleeping video was not as good a quality, it received much higher engagement in terms of the number of likes and shares. So based on our findings, people will forgive low-quality production, and it's the content that really matters. We wanted to vary the length of the videos. The Huffington Post typically publishes videos to Facebook that are around 1 minute, and all videos on Instagram cannot be more than 15 seconds. So we wanted to see how a 15-second video would perform on Facebook. We experimented with this by publishing the DIY gifts video we showed you earlier to Facebook. And it did remarkably well with 3,500 shares. So we thought it was interesting to see how we can reuse the same video for different social media platforms. We conducted surveys with the Huffington Post to determine if we established a cohesive voice and brand awareness. And we asked the readers questions about voice, memorability, and trustworthiness. Everyone indicated the tone of our videos was lighthearted, which shows we accomplished creating a consistent voice across the different videos. We determined we would need to test these consistently for a longer period of time to tell if these videos are meeting our brand awareness goals. So in a short amount of time, we were able to break social media assumptions through lightweight testing of short shareable videos. This testing is a simple and quick way for you to discover what tools work and direct you to next steps to produce more engaging content for mobile. We'd like to thank everyone listed here for their help and support with our project. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Sarah and Kylie. One thing I like about their project is that they asked to present their findings to the Huffington Post at the Huffington Post, which they did a couple of weeks ago, and there are about 25 people from the social media team and people interested in social media at the Huffington Post to hear their findings, which is part of what we want our students to do, is to go back to their partners and say, here's what we found, and have an audience at the company. John, are you ready?
Yes.
Take it away.
Hi, my name is John. I'm not only a journalist, but also a huge soccer fan. During the World Cup, my favorite journalism reporting was this New York Times article illustrating all the 984 possible scenarios whether the Team USA could advance to the knockout stage. But when I was actually sitting in the bar during the middle of the game, I took out my cell phone, I opened up this article, and I found that the canvas was suddenly becoming so tiny on my phone that every time I want to click on a spot, I always missed it by clicking on the one next to it. And you really can't say that was because my fingers are too big. Now, I think this is not a problem that only the New York Times is facing. When we do data journalism, we sometimes forget to think about its usability on mobile devices. Take my project partner Kaylees as an example. It is a Chinese news startup covering popular brands in a fast pace with lots of data. 300,000 readers are consuming charts every day on their website, and actually 90% of them are coming from mobile. But if you look at the chart they make on mobile, it's just an exact copy of the desktop version with the same aspect ratio, which makes it extremely hard to digest. However, I developed a solution that can help small newsrooms to extend their data journalism from desktop monitors to smartphone screens. And it's also changing the way how Kaylees does its data journalism. For this solution, I'm going to call it ChartWiz. ChartWiz is a package all about choosing the right tool and the right workflow. First, let's talk about the tool. The tool I'm using is called eCharts. It is a very new data visualization platform developed by China's biggest search engine company, Baidu. But it has already been listed by GitHub as one of the most commonly used open source database tools in the market. 3 months ago, I became one of the first bunch of journalists to beta test it. I soon discovered that eCharts is one of the exact tools that Kaylees is looking for. The thing I like most about it is that it's highly customizable on all screen sizes. Here are some charts we created for a story about Apple's Q4 earnings. As you can see, the charts are perfectly embedded in Kaylees' desktop website. They're also very highly interactive. When I hold on a chart, I'll be able to tell the exact data from each turning point. And if you look at the same chart on mobile, you'll be able to modify the specs in order to achieve a better display in your own mobile layout. So no matter you're using a laptop, a tablet, or a cell phone, eCharts creates a seamless reading experience on all your devices. But choosing the right tool is just the first step. What's more important to us is the workflow behind it. Because my goal is not only to make charts are so simple that everyone can understand, but also to simplify the chart making process so that everyone can make a chart. In order to achieve that, I prepared a guideline breaking down all the steps of a chart making process. Editors and journalists are now collaborating in Slack to pitch stories, discuss potential chart types, assign tasks, and share data sets. From that, journalists they can import their spreadsheets right into eCharts and start drawing mockups right away. I also drafted a style guide setting up all the details of the charts in different screen sizes, including their aspect ratio, margins, title sizes, spacing, animation, and color schemes. We pay so much attention to the tiniest details behind the charts, so when you actually see them on mobile, they're just simple and beautiful. Now, if you look at Kaylees' original workflow 3 months ago, to create charts, they use an outsourced design firm. People who actually made the charts are designers, not journalists. And Kaylees journalists, they literally had to draw mockups to show the designers whether it should be a bar chart or a pie chart. With all these problems combined, it used to take a full cycle of 7 days for Kaylees journalists to create an article with charts. Well, I'm happy to tell you, now it takes just 1 day. That is 85% more efficient. So, to sum up, my Studio 3 project is a complete solution that allows small newsrooms to achieve data journalism rapidly and routinely on mobile devices. From that experience, I'll also say a journalist doesn't need to be super tech savvy in order to build something out of scratch to add value to the web. Instead, he can work with existing innovations like eCharts and add value to it by making it more flexible, usable, and accessible. I'd like to thank all my colleagues at Q Daily, Jay, Zoe, and my Studio 20 classmates for their great support. And this is the story of ChartWiz, my next step innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Here's what I love about John's project. From New York, we're creating change and an 85% gain in efficiency in a Q Daily newsroom that is 7,000 miles away, which means that our partners for these projects can come from anywhere on the globe. So this has huge implications for journalism education because the world is becoming more global. Kaylee, are you ready?
I am.
Take it away.
Hi, my name is Kaylee. For the past 3 months, I've been testing Fast Company's newsletters with the goal of not only optimizing the standard email newsletter format, but to really go beyond the surface and redefine what an email newsletter is and what it should be in order to take full advantage of the email format in the age of the smartphone. The Email Brief is a mobile-first designed email newsletter that provides unique content to subscribers to drive user engagement and increase loyalty. Now, when trying to reimagine the email newsletter, the first thing I had to tackle was that there are two very different kinds of email newsletters. There's the promotional and the editorial. The promotional email is where we began. This is the email newsletter Fast Company has been sending out for years. The email is an RSS-style feed of Fast Company's news stories chosen by an editorial staff member. The goal of this email is purely promotional, to drive traffic back to the Fast Company site, which it does with a click-through rate of 31%. Then we have the editorial email. This is the email we created in September. Now, coming up with this format really required going back to the basics and getting at the medium. What is an email? An email is personal. It provides unique content. So how can we make the newsletter more in line with its medium? With a voice and personal tone from an editor who writes the newsletter every morning. They start with a greeting, end with a salutation, and deliver some content in the body of the email that doesn't have an ulterior motive to drive clicks, but allows subscribers to learn something without clicking through. This was our first iteration of an editorial email, but after testing, our quantitative data revealed a 21% drop in click-through rates, which could have been reasonable if the editorial email product had better qualitative feedback from our subscribers. But our qualitative data told us that users weren't pleased either. This email got a 2 out of 5, which showed us that our users, our current subscribers, weren't ready for a purely text, purely editorial email. They wanted better skimmability and they wanted images. So in our second iteration, with the feedback that we got from the first time around, we did a redesign, still taking a mobile-first design, which meant we didn't put images back in. With this redesign, our click-through rate increased by 15%, and we managed to appease a larger number of subscribers who gave this newsletter an overall rating of 4 out of 5. Still room for improvement. So we started this process with a competitive analysis to assess what other people were doing. We then collected all of the data from Fast Company's newsletters for the past year in order to understand what subscribers were doing and to have a starting point to compare future data. We then surveyed our current subscribers to understand what they valued most in the Fast Company newsletter in order to make sure those elements were maintained. I then looked at the current workflow, made a new workflow, and made sure that the workflow during the testing period would be feasible and that we'd have something workable that would be sustainable over time. Based on those results, we made more templates to test. We separated our subscriber base into 3, sending out a different newsletter to each group in order to A/B test different elements directly and to track the results long term. We also made sure to gather ongoing user feedback, especially for our editorial product, to make sure that our users were happy, engaged, and involved in our process. We then gathered and analyzed the quantitative data. Now, every step in this process not only informed the next step, but helped inform the final recommended newsletter version. And it also helped me understand that unlike what I initially thought, the final Fast Company newsletter couldn't be a promotional or an editorial product. It wasn't an either-or situation at all. It was a spectrum. And for Fast Company, the newsletter had to sit somewhere in the middle and marry the objectives of both the editorial staff and subscribers while leveraging the unique medium that is the email in the age of the smartphone. With that in mind, the recommended email newsletter for Fast Company is an editorial promotional hybrid. It is personal in tone with a greeting, which is the essence of an email. It is responsive, mobile designed with text at the top. It takes into account the feedback from our users, which was to put the images back in. It takes into account the results of our quantitative testing, and it works with the workflow of the Fast Company editorial staff, as it doesn't require too much added time. It delivers a unique message with a more personal and engaging voice in an attempt to forge a relationship with our readers. This newsletter saw an increase in click-through, and it saw an overwhelmingly positive feedback from subscribers with an overall rating of 5 out of 5. Ultimately, I'd like to ask you to forget everything you thought you knew about email newsletters. I ask you to take it out of the hands of the marketing team and stay as far away as you can from using it as a purely promotional product. Email, after all, is a two-way communication tool and should not be used as a tool for mass message promotion. Put the email newsletter into the hands of the editorial staff to come up with a unique editorial product that will appease all parties. Remember that subscribers have provided you with their sacred personal space that is their email inbox. Respect that space with a thoughtful editorial email. It will go a long way to forging a relationship with your audience and driving loyalty. I want to thank everybody at Fast Company and everybody at Studio 20, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kaylee. You may have noticed in the middle of Kaylee's presentation, she said, so in our second iteration, from feedback we got during our first round, and that's a key to these projects, is we ask students not only to recommend changes, but to recommend changes they can measure. If they can measure them, they can find out if they work. If they know if they work, they can suggest even better changes in the next round. And that's a basic method that we use. Pei Pei, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Take it away.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pei Pei, and here is my project, The Social File. Why is social media so important? Because it not only brings us the information, but also the attention, especially for newsrooms. Unfortunately, many newsrooms are not getting the attention they want. Social media editors must feel terrible when they see that no one is engaging with their careful crafted posts. To fix this problem, a change is needed. At present, most newsrooms regard social media as the promote channel of their original content. Why not use social media in a different way and provide a service to your online audience? Social File is a project to help small news organizations provide online users with service to gain social attention, increase user engagement, and subsequently thrive on social media. My partner is China File, an online magazine containing reporting and commentary on China. Our social media channels deliver a package of news on China from media organizations and experts from both countries. In the past 3 months, our social media feed has been filled with original content from ChinaFile.com, Sinocism, a Chinese newsletter from a group of Beijing-based volunteers, and our editors' picks from across the internet. In order to broaden the mix of conversation around China, we created a Twitter list of Chinese media, US media, and China File contributors who really know and care about China. For example, the scholars and China-based journalists. Also, we introduced English content from the Chinese site Weibo into our Twitter and Facebook feed. Here is our daily workflow on Twitter. On the days we don't get Sinocism newsletter, we depend on Twitter and Weibo to find news for the afternoon. Generally, it takes about 2 hours a day to schedule all the posts for the day. And it worked. Look at the engagement rate on Twitter here. Engagement has increased. Do our audience engage more because we post more pictures with the link? The difference here is not that huge. Do they engage more because we provide more timely news? It seems not. People still respond a lot to China File's original in-depth articles weeks or even months after they were published. And do they engage more with a certain news source? No, again. The site associated to the news item did not affect its performance. The answer is content. People are reacting more to the information they need. By providing this service to our audience, we save them the time of having to look for information themselves. Maybe that's why we gained 3,400 more followers in less than 3 months, a 27% increase. Now let us take a look at Facebook. In the first half of November, we posted around 10 articles per day. From November 15th, we changed to 5. It turns out that if we selected really good content, we don't even have to post that often. Unlike Twitter, people are looking for fun on Facebook. They don't like serious, long articles on China's pollution. They prefer 365 pictures of the same building in Beijing, which can actually show how bad the air quality is. Besides providing information, we provide our audience with a place to talk and share on Facebook. Now you may be thinking, should I provide promotion or service on my social media? Let me show you 2 more graphics. The first one is the page view of ChinaFile.com from July to November. And the second one is the source of our website visit. The red line here represents social media. Although there is a decrease in early November due to Facebook, the service is indeed helping promotion. As I mentioned before, all you need is 2 hours a day to provide this service package to your audience. At last, I want to thank everyone who helped me and supported me in the past 3 months: Jonathan, Debbie, Susie from China File Newsroom, and Jay, Zoe, and my amazing classmates of Studio 20. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Pei Pei. As their professor, I'm realizing that something's a little different about my students tonight, and I figured out what it is. It's the first time I've seen them with lipstick. That's throwing me off a little bit. The person you hear thanked at the end of every presentation, Zoe Frad-Bernard, is the technical advisor to Studio 20. She's helped each one of these students not only with their presentation but with their projects throughout the year, and that's why they're so indebted to her. Erin, are you ready?
I am.
Erin, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So every day, people from all around the world are sharing tens of millions of Facebook posts, tweets, Instagram photos, and YouTube videos. Individually, they may not look like much, a snapshot from your vacation, a comment about a recent news event, but taken together, that massive amount of information is incredibly valuable. But as it stands now, these platforms are fairly siloed. There's no single place to get a good view of what the larger social web thinks about an issue. So my question was, how do you harness the depth and breadth of user-generated content created across social media platforms to give a new and valuable take on the news? I partnered with Vocative, a digital news startup based here in New York City that has a unique ability to tackle this problem. Vocative has developed proprietary software that enables their team of analysts and reporters to trawl the deep web for sources and information and analyze massive amounts of data coming from social media. The Dynamic Index, which is the project that we paired up to work on, streams display content from Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to enable a user to explore a topic across platforms. Its map-based interface lets you zoom in and explore content from a specific area, while the streams on the right side let you scroll through raw content or a collection of selected posts. It's in those selected posts that the Dynamic Index stands out from other API-based social streams. We wanted to give our users the chance to discover the breadth of a topic, not just see every single tweet under the same hashtag. So each piece of content is sourced and loaded into the system by an analyst-editor team. When we first started, we were 2 editors working with one of our analysts who was based in Tel Aviv. What we hoped would happen was this. The editors would pick a broad topic around a recent news event that was gaining social traction and send a few details to our analyst. And then we would get a variety of results back. We settled on our first story to try it out. The Virgin Galactic rocket had just crashed, and we wanted to get a social view into modern space travel. What we found actually happened was this. Our editors were thinking broad and expecting broad results. We wanted to see Instagrams from amateur astronauts in training, or yoga in space, or audition videos from Mars One volunteers. Our analyst, however, was thinking deep, and what we got back was a lot of Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Galactic, and his incredible head of hair. We also got feedback from our analyst that he needed more context, and that in order for our technology, or really any sourcing technology, to find a piece of content, it had to have either a hashtag or a geolocator on it. In other words, people may be doing yoga in space. They may even be Instagramming about it, but if they don't use a hashtag, we can't find them. People were tagging photos of Branson, and so that's what we turned up. These early tests revealed a lot about how we needed to shape our process and rethink the stories we wanted to tell with this tool. We started by getting everyone, editors and analysts, in the same room so we could get instant feedback and generate new angles on a story within minutes, not days. We tested dozens of ideas, from hot-button issues like the Ferguson grand jury verdict to location-based stories like crossing borders in conflict zones, to cultural trend stories like street art from around the world. We took the best results and user-tested them. From there, we came up with a clearer picture of what makes a compelling dynamic index social story. First, it's a story that represents a trend but isn't necessarily trending. When an issue explodes on Facebook or Twitter, the amount of signal noise you get is overwhelming, with tens of thousands of retweets or reactions, and it's hard to cut through and find the best content. One of our most successful stories in user testing was about youth firearm culture. Gun control is a huge issue in America today, but because we weren't following a specific trending hashtag, we could explore everything from the hashtag #MyFirstGun to the connection between birthday and AR-15. Second, it's a story that can be shown through people's everyday lives. Though there are a relative handful of activists and journalists hunting down stories and publishing on social media, most of what people share is from their own experience. We tested a story about trans culture that did just that, gave a look into the daily living of trans people around the world, and it was incredibly successful. And last, it has to be a story with multiple avenues of exploration and an opportunity for editorialization. Lots of publications do social media stories, but simply pulling 35 tweets from the Yes All Women hashtag or the Criming While White hashtag makes for a fairly flat story. Our users wanted to see a variety of kinds of posts on a topic, different viewpoints and experiences, and then have an editorial voice guide them through the issue as to what those posts might mean. The dynamic index is still in its infancy, and there's a lot left to discover and refine, but our hope is that it becomes a platform where user-generated content moves beyond the social media story and becomes a user-generated conversation. I want to thank Scott Cohen and Adam Pines and the team at Vocative for taking a chance on me, and Jay, Clay, and Zoe for all of their help and support, and my incredible classmates in Studio 20. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Erin. Perhaps you've noticed the recurrence of phrases like, "it didn't work," and "that was a failure." This is a key part of our method at Studio 20, which is we force students to test their ideas, and very often initially, their initial ideas don't work, and they have to revise what they think based on their feedback and improve from there. Kristin, are you ready?
I am.
Take it away, Kristin.
Hi, I'm Kristin. I am a radio junkie, and every spring and fall during the fundraiser, it occurs to me, if public radio is able to make their audience care enough to donate so much money twice a year, they must be doing something right. And not only do they fundraise well, but throughout the year, they have members call in and contribute, give their expertise, and sometimes even build ground temperature thermometers to contribute to reporting. Their audience is dedicated and truly a part of the team. With this in mind, I became interested in figuring out how to make audience engagement better throughout of all of journalism, particularly on the internet, where we have more tools but aren't taking full advantage of them. The Engagement Party is a project that develops a set of rules and guiding philosophies for tailoring engagement to specific news outlets through research and interviews, and works with a publication, my media partner Matter, a digital magazine, to create a site-specific engagement strategy tailored to their voice and character. Engaging with your audience shouldn't be generic. It should be customized to carry your brand and voice as it spreads across platforms. The problem I wanted to solve is, how can a publication create an engagement strategy that complements their personality? To me, engagement is something more than sharing. I was focusing specifically on calls to action or things that would get people to do something. I tried to do this in two ways: by creating a set of best practices for site-specific customized engagement based on my research and interviews, and by working with Matter to create an engagement strategy tailored to their platform and type of publication. The first way to customize engagement is to figure out one guiding characteristic for the publication. For the New York Times, it's quality, maintaining their legacy. For Studio 360, it's the ability to replay it on the radio, bringing their audience into their shows. For ProPublica, it's geared at creating communities around their different investigations, involving the populations that are most affected. This is both an overarching guideline and a tip for designing the final product. No matter what the guiding characteristic is, make the engagement strategy match the style of the publication. Second, develop a schedule that matches the natural rhythms found within the ways the news sites operate. You need to have a schedule and timeline in place for different size projects and how they integrate into your workflow. The schedule can be flexible and can be updated. That's agile and that's good. But you can't reinvent the wheel for every Twitter callout or every crowdsourced investigative project. Setting a flexible but outlined schedule will create a set of guidelines people can return to for each new project. For example, at Studio 360, they use the 6-week cycle as a guideline for every single challenge. The producer leading the project will change, the topic will change, the medium of the product will change, but the 6-week cycle remains their go-to time frame. Third, the expectation should be set that the journalists care about engaging with the audience. This approach requires dedicated leaders who define a culture of interaction. There are two good ways to create this culture: have dedicated staff or make the staff dedicate their time. Most of the organizations I spoke to have dedicated engagement editors like ProPublica and The Guardian, but just a few have expectations built into the staff's workflow, such as Studio 360 and Day Correspondent. At Day Correspondent, a crowdfunded Dutch publication, journalists are expected to engage with their audience members and spend a lot of time doing so. The co-founder and publisher also said that they never told their journalists to do this exactly, but that the expectation was there from the moment they were hired. To test these theories, at Matter, we decided on 3 projects with a magazine feature product as the end goal to test what the guiding characteristic would be. The first was to build a collection focusing on transparency and building readers' trust. The second was a user-generated content project and challenges for the users. The third was crowdsourced reporting and storytelling projects that allowed users to contribute their stories themselves. We also developed an engagement workflow that matches a traditional magazine workflow so that it integrates seamlessly into the publication and doesn't disrupt existing work. And last, we assigned an editor to each project so that there was always someone on staff working on the project. And here last are some tips to keep in mind when planning your engagement strategy. In the same way that the news cycle is constantly changing, innovation is too. It's an ongoing process of updates. Traditional workflows are really hard to infiltrate, so don't always try to fight them. Learn to work within them. And last, and well known amongst engagement people, is not every call out will receive a response. That's okay. Keep trying, keep testing to discover what works for you and your audience. The Engagement Party attempts to improve audience engagement outreach across platforms in journalism by customizing engagement strategies through a brief set of guidelines. Please take the ideas presented here and implement them in your own newsroom. I would like to thank Jay and Clay and Zoe, just like everyone else, also my parents, and of course everyone I worked with at Matter and all of the engagement gurus who let me take their time to interview them. Please let me know later if you have any questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kristin. One of the things we teach our students in Studio 20 is to first consult best practices. And one of the great things that technical people, programmers have brought to journalism is a willingness to share knowledge willingly, which wasn't always the case with hyper-competitive reporters, but is becoming the case in journalism today. And Kristin took advantage of that in her project. Okay, Trent, are you ready to go?
I better be.
Take it away.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Trent. Now, I'm from a small country in the Caribbean called Trinidad and Tobago, and we're famous for many things, such as having one of the world's largest carnival presentations, being the home of limbo, soca and calypso music, and of course, steel pan. However, what we're not known for is digital innovation, especially in the field of journalism. So this summer, I went back home and I partnered with a cable news channel called CNC3 to help them tackle some of their digital problems. And if you take a quick look at their website, you will see that they had many. For instance, they had promo banners advertising shows that have absolutely nothing to do with the news. The page serves as an archive for YouTube videos taken from their main newscast, and their most recent comments are over a year old. If you had to compare this to any era of US media development, I would say this is something out of the late 1990s. In fact, if you look at CNN's.com in August of 2000, they were far more developed. Now, Trinidad has only 1.2 million people. 1.7 million people have mobile subscriptions, and there are over 440,000 people who use their mobile devices to access social media. So taking into account this young mobile-savvy generation and the fact that the newsroom has no Wi-Fi, we decided to leapfrog the web era and go straight to mobile. Hence, International, Innovation Without Borders, was born. The International Project empowers journalists and citizens to instantly share stories and directly engage each other in the rapidly evolving digital community of Instagram. Now, a community for news does exist on Instagram. And as using our analytics as basic indicators, you can see that since we first launched the page on July 24th, we have only posted 105 media that have attracted over 1,700 followers and garnered over 2,400 likes. What was most interesting is that of the top 25 media on the page, almost all were photos except for one video, which is this video that a journalist took of a flood in a small village. Crowdsourcing is possible on Instagram, but I admit it has been slow, especially compared to Twitter, where CNC3 has over 32,000 followers. We believe this is because of the extra steps involved in uploading content to Instagram, such as trying to fit to those aspect ratios, cropping your images and video. However, 15 people have regularly been using the CNC3 News hashtag, my favorite being this photo on the left. There was a flood, and an alligator, which we call Cayman in Trinidad, came ashore and just sat in the middle of a street. Now, let me tell you a very interesting story about how Instagram is impacting the news ecosystem of Trinidad and Tobago. On November 5th and November 6th, the Institute of Marine Affairs, they had a protest, and they were trying to get higher salaries and wages. Nobody was paying attention, so a contact of mine sent me some photos and videos that we put on the Instagram page, and on the third day, November 7th, his director informed him that negotiations finally started because the media was covering it on social media, that being CNC3. What was even more interesting is that later that day, other media houses started showing up to try to catch up with what we had been doing already on CNC3's Instagram. Of course, to get the journalists involved, we had to secure buy-in. And to do that, we had to sell this idea to them by answering the questions, so what? And why should I care? Now, I could have easily said, this is to help your country, this is to help your organization. But they didn't really care about that. So we decided, you know what, let's give them a platform so they could get their own names out there, get their faces out there, and build their own brand by extension of CNC3. To keep the momentum going on the Instagram page, I have prepared this implementation for proposal document. It entails several sections, such as the background and importance of Instagram, all the way down to the timeline of the development of the project. So as you can see, Instagram can be used as a platform for citizens to share their stories and for journalists to engage their communities. As my results have shown, there's still room for growth, but its impact on the news ecosystems of developing countries such as Trinidad and Tobago can be great. If you're considering using this approach at your organization, be it that you're a small startup or going back to a developing country yourself, I strongly suggest it. I would like to thank Jay, Zoe, Jason Samuels, Sylvan, Nicholas Sabga at CNC3, all of my Studio 20 classmates, and of course, everyone back in sweet Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
All right, Trent. Very good. What I really love about Trent's project is not only that we're making change in Trinidad 2,300 miles away, but that we're leveraging the fact that the US market is in one point in technological time, and Trinidad and Tobago is at a different point. So I hope you understood the part of his presentation where he essentially said, we're going to try and skip right over the desktop era from broadcast and print to mobile and see if it works. Now that's a very big idea. It's a big ambition. And our method is to take these big ideas, run a small experiment with them, so that even if you have modest results, you learn a lot because you're testing something big. Katya, you ready?
Yes.
Take it away. You're going to do great.
Hi, my name is Katerina, and I'm here to tell you how to transform a legacy newspaper into a digital-first publication and target it to specific needs of a niche audience. At least half of this audience, meaning you guys, felt what I felt. You came from somewhere abroad, and you felt like an outcast. You needed advice and information and a new community of people, a new network. I came to the United States 1.5 years ago, and I had all these problems, and I had another one. I liked my cottage cheese for breakfast. Now, I don't know where to find this in Manhattan. Now, this and all the other adjusting issues I mentioned are journalistic problems. I'm Ukrainian. I'm a part of a 3 million community of Russian speakers in the United States. These people come from different post-Soviet countries, like my home, Ukraine, or Azerbaijan, or Belarus. We have similar cultures, but we share also the same language, and we're commonly referred as the Russians. Now, there are more than 50 websites, TV channels, newspapers, and magazines serving the Russian-speaking audiences in the United States. They have plenty of advertisements, and they provide poor journalism and bad user experience, as you can see on the screenshots. Neither of these publications does what media should do: save users' time and provide community. I partnered with the oldest Russian language newspaper called Forum Daily. It was established in 1998. It has around 5,000 subscribers and enjoyed $1 million turnover in the best years. The media has a website. The content is unfortunately news aggregation and articles from the weekly print newspapers. So my ambition was to convert a legacy newspaper into a niche digital publication serving the needs of the Russian-speaking community in the United States. Russian media in the United States are fond of publishing political news and opinion pieces. They concentrate on what is happening back home. Forum Daily is no different. I found this very sad and boring. So I created an online survey and I asked people what is their age, just to know, media consumption habits, and what do they expect journalists to do for them. I was very happy to learn that I was not the only one who was bored, and I was not the only one who needed cottage cheese. People need advice on how to find Russian language theater for their kids. They want to learn when the Russian ballet is coming to New York City, and they want journalists to tell them where to buy the tickets. Also, the audience wants a community to interact with each other and exchange baby strollers and books and get advice and so on. So, Forum Daily published completely different things. After analyzing their content, I understood that what they did is just publish around 80% of news about politics. They did aggregation, they just published random news about New York City and about what is happening back home in Belarus, or Ukraine or Israel. And they occasionally publish some community news, once a month. So I looked into their workflow and realized that the editorial team consists only of 3 staff members and 8 freelancers and a content manager who puts everything online. They do content for 2 print newspapers, and the same content is published online then. So I suggested drastic changes. First, there must be 4 editorial beats: success stories, leisure guide, community news, and useful information. Second, news from back home and from New York should be aggregated. Too much energy was spent on them before. Third, there must be a community editor in charge of the social media and user interactions on the website. Very importantly, this new workflow would need new content and also new people. I analyzed the existing budget of this publication and proposed to hire new people and get rid of some old ones, like copy editor. The cost rose twice, which is unfortunate, but hopefully the quality would rise also many times. So what happened next? I talked to the investor of Forum Daily. I suggested all the changes in workflow, budget, hiring and firing people, etc. And I've got great news. He liked the suggested changes and he agreed to finance the new editorial team for 2 years until the project becomes profitable. I'll be heading the project. I would like to thank Studio 20 folks, Zoe, Jay, also my family, my stepdad, Bob, my mom, and my fiancé. And you're welcome to contact me if you have some questions. Also, if you speak Russian or would like to learn some Russian, you're welcome to contact me. And we have freelance budget right now, as you know. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Katya. I hope you understood from Katya's presentation that she essentially convinced the owner of this publication to double his investment in it and create a completely new economy for the publication. So this is our final presentation. And Lila, are you ready?
Jay, I'm ready.
Okay, take it away.
Okay, hello. My name is Lila Raptopoulos. I worked on reporting The Question with The Guardian. 2 years ago, Hurricane Sandy hit, and it devastated New York City. And if you were also here, you may have had the same initial thought that I did, which was, how was the city so unprepared for that storm? How could it have flooded 9 tunnels and damaged thousands of homes and cut Lower Manhattan's power for days? And now, a few years later, there was another important question lingering that I couldn't answer, and that question is, are we actually safer now? Which really can only be answered with a host of smaller questions, like who's making sure that the next big storm doesn't hurt as bad? And who in the city is responsible for preparing our subways and waterfronts and power grids for future crises? Most articles to come out about this year have given us snapshots. They update us on people or ideas or events, like that building code's passed, or a new project was announced, or how Cuomo feels about his new transit plan. And in a daily newsroom, it's good and important to report, but the structure allows little room to answer some of the user's most basic questions, like what's the big picture? Most of you have probably been listening to Serial, I imagine. If you haven't, and this is from my parents, hopefully that's it. It's an explosive, successful new podcast that tells one story over a series of weeks. And its success is a good reminder that there's an appreciation out there for ambiguity and for taking on the big story and working through it over time. In the reporting style here, complexity and ambiguity aren't part of the narrative, but both are the nature of our world. So it's still worth reporting on the questions that don't have an obvious answer. So here's my problem. It's hard to simplify and make sense of a complex world. The answer to are we safer affects and matters to all of our well-beings. But to understand the answer, we first need to unpack the ecosystem, which is this web of agencies and committees and offices and people and plans and policies that all work together on that goal. I don't think a person in this audience would argue that we as journalists shouldn't make the complex systems that govern our lives more accessible to our users. The question that drove this project was how. So this is what I tried. I created a series with The Guardian called Stormproofing the City, which started with the premise, it's been 2 years since Hurricane Sandy. Natural disasters cause more damage than war. Are we safer? A New York City resident, that's me, investigates the complex urban network meant to protect us from future storms by interviewing the people within it. Within the series, I did both an editorial and a technical experiment. Editorially, I decided to approach this project through a series of interviews. Not exactly a new technique, but instead of asking these people for an update, I asked them to explain their role in this network in very simple terms, and to take a whack at answering the question, are we safer? And my technical experiment was to try to design the series in a smarter way for the web. Usually series are set up like unconnected topics on one broad theme, or like one really long article cut into a number of parts to be published over time, and I was doing more of a web. So this is one of my interviews. I made the series web by reflecting and referencing and linking back to past interviews within each new one and linking forward from the older ones. I also wrote a guide that defined my quest, and we're working on a conclusion of 8 takeaways from the series. This structure gave users direction and some closure. It also packaged the series well for the future. As another series experiment, I let people subscribe and sent them an email newsletter with each new update. And this made me accessible to my 450 most engaged readers, and it gave me a reliable way to reach them with new installments. So I didn't have to just cross my fingers and hope they would find it. The open rate averaged at 46%, which is pretty good, about double the Guardian's daily US newsletter. Finally, I included a call out for the experts who were reading to share their knowledge, and then built that knowledge into the reporting. Not a lot of people wrote in, 39, but half of those who did really helped my reporting and were very valuable. And then there's this, excluding Twitter bots, about 1 of every 10 people who read a piece from the series found it meaningful enough to share on social media. And that's substantially higher than the Guardian's average share rate per reader. This type of reporting isn't linear, it's not necessarily chronological, and it's messier than daily reporting. But there's a place for it, because it's not until these systems fail that we suddenly realize it could have been different if we had known how it worked ahead of time. So think of major events that have brought a failing system to light. A storm like Sandy, or the 2008 housing crisis, or watching 2 grand juries fail to indict the cops who killed Darren Wilson and Michael Brown. In the wake of events like these, taking on the whole system and then asking the people within it to explain it in simple terms is of value. It's up to us to help people better understand our world. One way to do it is by reporting the question, even if you don't already know the answer. Thanks for your time. Thanks especially to Amanda Mickle for her keen guidance, Jay and Clay and Zoe for their brainpower, my classmates, and everyone else for their support and insight.
Thank you, Lila. So we are now going to transition to Josh Benton, who is our
Can we say
special.
one more thing?
Yes?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We just have a gift for you and Zoe.
We
wanted to thank you for teaching us how to express our ideas better and think deliberately and ultimately expand the way we think about how journalism can be. So we made paid-in problem T-shirts for you. Yeah, and a onesie for Zoe's future baby.
Parent-teacher student 20 team member.
Hopefully after tonight we'll be paid in real money. But in serious, we've grown immensely over the past year, and we can't thank you both enough.
feel like a diva up here. Thank you very much, class of 2014. Josh Benton is going to get his presentation ready. Josh, for those who don't know him, is the director of Nieman Lab at another university in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Nieman Lab studies the same thing that our students are studying, which is how to innovate in journalism and change it for the better. And Josh's publication, Nieman Lab, tracks the changes that are sweeping through journalism. It reports on new and interesting developments. And so I asked Josh to total up the year in innovation and present it in a series of slides that give us the highlights. And we are paying him for this because he
Don't set their expectations too high, Jay.
He is a professional. And are you ready, Josh?
Sure.
Okay, take it
After
away.
that build up, I don't know if I can get any more ready. Thank you, Jay, for having me back. I was happy to be here last year to speak at this slideshow at this event. There was actually an odd bit of timing in that Jay was very specific in making sure that he wanted to make sure that my wife came down to last year's event. And it just so happened, this is not a direct correlation, but we had just decided in the weeks and months before that we were going to start trying to have a baby. And we both came down to New York, and we got a hotel room. And it actually looks like there's a very good chance that our child was conceived this evening, a year ago. That's right. So I'm now being paid in problems. So I'm very happy to introduce you to our son. We're thinking the coloration will even out over time, but we're not sure about that. No, actually, that's our boy. He's very cute. Dashiell Benton. If you want to follow him, twitter.com/DashiellBenton. He has a lot of interesting thoughts at age 3 months. He is currently followed by a small group of friends and family and colleagues and Taye Diggs. For whatever reason, Taye Diggs does follow my infant son on Twitter. As Jay said, my goal here is not to present some grand overarching narrative for where we are headed or what the future of news holds or anything like that. It is simply to have a chance to look back on the past 12 months and think about what are the moments, the ideas, the initiatives, the changes that I think stuck with me, and hopefully will stick with others, on what happened this year in the evolution of the news ecosystem. So it's about 20 things. I'll run through them fairly quickly. And hopefully some of them will be very familiar to you. Some of them may be slightly less familiar, and hopefully they're good things to think about, particularly for these folks as they go into their careers and get paid with real money as opposed to problems. Let us start out with newspapers. I don't know how many of you are familiar with. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of a newspaper. It's a printed. It's like an iPad, but you can bend it. If I look back honestly on the last year, there's no doubt what the key moment was for innovation in news in the United States. It was the release of this report. I'm curious, show of hands, how many of you have read some portion of this report? I'm among my people. This is a wonderful thing. The New York Times sequestered a group of good journalists to spend a number of months thinking about the state of innovation within the Times, and they produced this report entitled Innovation that was initially meant for an audience of Times executives. Someone, thankfully, decided to leak it out, and the entire news universe decided to descend on this report. I can tell you, we wrote a lengthy, if you don't have time to read the roughly 100 pages or so, and you should make the time, you can go to search for New York Times Innovation Report on our site, and you'll find our précis of it. It is by far the most popular post we've ever done on Nieman Lab. Over close to 500,000 people have read it. It's gotten about 28,000 shares on Twitter and Facebook. There is this enormous hunger to understand what this report allowed, which was the opening up of what were previously a lot of internal issues at the Times. It really served as free therapy for a lot of journalists who did not work at the New York Times, but who recognized a lot of the issues that the report raised. The difficulty of converting a culture that was based around a certain set of primarily print paradigms that were oriented around certain reward structures and power structures and silos, all the things that were preventing the Times from being all that it could be in the digital space. It's so great that it was not written for public digestion, because you can see sort of the rawness in there as people describe the struggles that they had trying to get a digital career going at the New York Times. The Times has been able to benefit from that, but I've personally spoken to close to 10 different news organizations that have said some variant of, we had this guy and we wanted him to write our innovation report. This report is, I think, going to go down as one of the key moments in how news has adapted to this digital world. The other big news of the Times this year was what some people call paywalls 2.0. So if you think back to how newspapers have been doing in recent years, it's a pretty sad story. Advertising revenue, after dropping terribly during the recession, has continued to decline, somewhere in the range of 8 to 9% every year, print advertising revenue. It keeps dropping. There continues to be some hope that maybe that will change, but it doesn't seem to change, and I think we're getting beyond hope for that changing. The only real bright spot had been, for some newspapers at least, circulation revenue. They started charging more for their home subscribers, and they started digital paywalls that generated some revenue. Some were relatively successful, like the Times's, which has gotten about 800,000 subscribers. Others less so, but it was one of the few areas in any newspaper's financial documents where numbers were going up as opposed to down. But as is often the case with paywalls, the numbers had started to plateau at lots, and in some cases even shrink at a lot of newspapers. The Times went through this previously with Times Select, if anyone remembers that from the last decade. They very quickly got to about 150, 160, 170,000 subscribers, but then it plateaued, and when they shut it down quite a few months later, they only had 221,000 or so, very much flattened out. And they were starting to see the same sort of idea with the main Times paywall. So the idea was, let's create new kinds of paywalls, new paid products that could be at a lower price point, attract different kinds of audience, and maybe we'll be able to build these smaller mounds into mountains over time. There were three main ideas: the NYT Now, which is the app you see right here, an opinion app, and a cooking app. Things did not go all that great. NYT Now is a wonderful app. I think it's significantly better than the New York Times main app, but it hasn't generated this kind of subscriber numbers that people were hoping for. NYT Opinion did so poorly that they've just shut it down and decided to stop the product. And the cooking product is doing well and is lovely, but it's free, in part to make sure that they can get around this idea of not getting enough people to sign up to make it worth their while. The New York Times is critical for newspapers nationwide on this question, because we saw in the end of the last decade and the beginning of the current one so much talk about paywalls and so little action. It really took the New York Times putting up its paywall for lots of other newspapers to follow. And there was a lot of hope and optimism that these paywalls, these paid products, were going to be a way to generate a similar sort of boom. And it didn't really work out. We'll see where that takes us in the next year. I should say one other thing. Other newspapers are trying to figure out similar sorts of premium product strategies. The Dallas Morning News, where I used to work as a reporter, decided to create a premium approach that would give you a better user experience if you paid a certain number of dollars a month. That didn't work either. They killed it. No one's been able to figure this out so far. I've front-loaded all the newspaper stuff because that's the depressing stuff. So we're going to get through that, and as a group, we're going to come together to a beautiful place. I just want you to know that. I don't know if it's a beautiful place, but... Another big trend this year is the separation of companies that used to have print, newspapers and magazines, and television and radio to a certain degree, broadcast outfits. They used to all be in the same company. This was the year when everyone basically decided to split up. It was a sad divorce. For a number of times, a number of companies, Gannett, which was the largest newspaper company in the United States and had a very large television presence, they decided they were just going to split into two companies so that the newspaper side would no longer drag down the TV side. The Tribune Company did the same thing, decided to send its newspapers out on an ice floe to figure out its own future, loading it down with a lot of heavy debt and things of that sort. Journal Communications Scripps did a similar sort of split, and Time Inc. in the magazine world was split away from its previous happy space. What this really means is that there used to be a bit more breathing room for newspapers than there is today. It used to be a part of a larger media concern. Going forward, they're going to be having their own profit and loss. That is the entity, the entirety of the entity. And yeah, this is the depressing part. I'm sorry. How about we look at Jeff Bezos laughing? Is that going to help? Because one of the good things about this year was the remarkable rebound that the Washington Post has seen. Jeff Bezos is of course the founder of Amazon.com and an extraordinarily wealthy individual who has a remarkable laugh. And he was part of one of the big trends of 2013, which has continued on, which is billionaires buying media outlets because they now sell for roughly the amount of change in their couch cushions. Although he did pay $250 million very generously for the Washington Post. It's remarkable how little innovation there has been at most American newspapers around the business model. If I were to describe the narrative of the last decade, it has been, our revenue dropped 4%, 5%, 20% in the really bad years. I guess we'll cut expenses the same amount and basically keep doing the same thing that we were doing. That sort of claustrophobia financially led to a lot of newspapers that really didn't know anything other than cutting. That's all they really knew what to do. When Jeff Bezos arrived and bought the Washington Post, he said, I give you runway. For some period of time, for a number of years, you don't really have to worry about making a profit. And it's been remarkable to see the explosion of new products and new ideas that have come out of that experience in the Post. I mean, a lot of the credit goes to Marty Baron in the newsroom. But they have a very interesting network strategy where they're now offering digital subscriptions to paying customers of other American newspapers. So if you get the Toledo Blade and you subscribe to it, you get digital access to the Washington Post as a throw-in benefit, trying to become a national newspaper without being a national print newspaper. It's really a kind of a remarkable strategy. And it's amazing what a little bit of breathing room can do to the talented people who work there. The last newspaper item, then we can move on. Gannett, not the most loved newspaper company in the world, but one that has a lot of scale, and decided this year that they were going to blow up their newsrooms in a far more extensive way than other newspaper companies have done. As I said before, most newspapers have simply just shrunk a little bit more every year. It's not really defining a path forward. One of the exceptions there is the advanced newspapers, owned by the family that owns Condé Nast. In New Orleans and Cleveland and Portland, they have decided to take a different path forward. It's a very unpopular path and a path that involves firing a lot of journalists, but at least it's a different path. Gannett this year joined them. They decided to really reinvent their newsrooms, which you can describe negatively as they fired a whole bunch of journalists and made everyone else apply for their jobs again. But you could also describe it as the kind of transformation that they might need to imagine a digital future. I'm not quite ready to endorse what they did because it's pretty problematic. But nonetheless, as an outside observer, after seeing newspapers just sort of die a little bit more every day, it's nice to see someone trying something a little bit different. All right, let's move to mobile phones. That's happier, right? Everyone likes mobile phones. So this was the year when the mobile majority finally arrived. We've been talking about it for a while, and it's been sort of the thing that the tech person in your newsroom might have been mentioning a year or two ago, that, hey, these things are going to be important and stuff. But didn't always get traction within the organization. A year ago, you saw places that were starting to get around 30% of their traffic, news organizations, 30% of their traffic from mobile devices. And then they started to see a majority mobile experience on weekends and in evenings. Now you're seeing a lot of large news companies are saying they are just majority mobile, period. That is where the audience is, companies like CNN and ESPN. Now, this is really the first year I think you could say that every media company is taking mobile seriously, which is kind of a sad statement, given that the iPhone is not something that was invented yesterday. But nonetheless, it does seem like there has been some advancement. Part of that advancement is that you're seeing companies trying to monetize on mobile significantly more. I don't know about you, but when I go to newspaper sites on my phone, the ads are much more intrusive. They are popovers that take over the entire page. They are not the small banners that they used to deal with. Earlier this week, Mark Thompson, the CEO of the Times Company, said that the majority of the Times' digital traffic comes on mobile devices now, but only 10% of their digital ad revenue comes from mobile devices. And that's the problem they're trying to fix. Just when we thought we were going from dollars to dimes in the transition from print to the web, I think the half penny is not a coin anymore, but it's something along that scale when you go down to mobile. So hopefully there'll be some attention paid there as well. The other thing that's happened this year, it's an ongoing thing, but phones are getting really, really big. Of course, Android phones have been big for some time, but with the debut of the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus and the iPhone 6 Cubed, the iPhone, whatever other exponential iPhones there may be, you're seeing changes in how people are actually acting. This, for example, is some interesting data from Pocket, the Read It Later service. They looked at users of Pocket who have both an iPhone and an iPad, and they looked at how the usage of their app was split between those two platforms. So you can see for people who had the iPhone 5.6, the old iPhone, old as in, was the new iPhone 6 months ago, and if they had an iPad, about 55% of their reading was done on the phone. For iPhone 6 users, 72% of their reading is done on the phone. For iPhone 6 Plus users, 80% of their reading is on the phone. As our phones are getting bigger, that is where we're going to for our media consumption. They also found that video, these users were 40% more likely to watch a video on their iPhone 6 Plus than they were on an iPhone 5S. The bigger screens change user behavior. This has a pretty significant impact on what I think is now the fairly discredited dream that a lot of media companies, particularly in this city, had, and with the debut of the iPad, the idea that the tablet would be the place to recapture the old business model, that a magazine company would create this replica edition that would be just like the old magazine, but you could touch things and things would happen. That dream has led to a lot of expenses and a lot of investment and not a huge amount of return. And I think that, combined with the fact that iPad sales are actually declining year over year now, I think we can say that the overemphasis on tablets over phones that the media industry had over the last 5 years was officially a bad idea. We could say it was unofficially a bad idea before. Now I think it's official. But what's interesting is that we've been waiting for a new sort of mobile native news experience to come along, and nothing has really stuck with the audience. I'm not thinking of things like Flipboard that are aggregators fundamentally. I'm thinking of a number of startups, Inside.com being one, Circa being another, Now This News, which is now just Now This. You can sort of see what direction they're moving. All of which were based around the idea that we need to create content that is specially designed for phones. That you can't just as you couldn't repurpose print material onto the web, you can't just take web material and put it onto phones. There are tons of good ideas in all of these apps. None of them seem to have really actually achieved success with readers or users or subscribers. And they're all in various states of I don't want to say disrepair, but none of them is really just knocking it out of the park right now. So I think we're still going to have to wait and to see what is the new mobile experience that people are going to connect with. BuzzFeed's going to be coming out with a new native news app for phones next year, and I'll be interested to see if that can advance that idea. Also on mobile phones, we did see improvements this year with push alerts and notifications. Well, if you think about it, as more of your news consumption comes on phones, particularly for all the people who have iPhones where their newspaper apps are sadly buried inside that newsstand icon that you never touch. You need to be more accurately and more usefully interrupted if you want people to read your content. And the New York Times, for example, always had the difficulty of having universal push notifications to everyone, whether you lived in New York or whether you lived in Taiwan. So I remember for a long time I was getting lots of alerts about what New York State senator had stabbed someone recently. And I just didn't really care that much because I didn't have a New York State senator to call my own. In one of the recent iterations of their iPhone app, they now let you decide, I don't want any New York local notifications, or give me lots of business notifications. It's not quite at the level of granularity that the breaking news app from NBC News Digital has, which I think is still the state of the art there. But in particular, as we move towards this device coming out in a few months and others that will join it, This is basically just a window into notifications. That's sort of all it is. So while it may sound rude to say we need to get better at interrupting people, we really need to get better at interrupting people. And I think we made some strides this year, but there's a long way to go. Social. We all live in this man's world. It's kind of sad. Even people who were just his roommates now have the ability to radically change news organizations. Just his roommate. I just had to live with him for like 3 semesters in like the early 2000s, and you get to do things to a magazine. This was a big year for Facebook. Anyone who runs a news site will tell you that traffic from Facebook really skyrocketed this year, a huge and really growing share, to the point that people were starting to voice concerns about being overly dependent on Facebook traffic and how that changed the kind of content you wanted to produce. The same sorts of things we used to hear about Google and don't hear quite so much about Google anymore, frankly. For a lot of people who read news and other content, Facebook is the internet. It's the entirety of the universe online that they work with. You may remember over the last couple of years, we've had a lot of discussion around dark social. Do anyone remember dark social? Dark social was the idea that because of an old quirk in how traffic is labeled in your analytics software, there was lots of traffic coming from sources that we didn't know what the source was. The idea that you were getting this traffic to this article and you couldn't quite figure out why, and the label of dark social was put over that. Well, Alexis Madrigal, the guy who came up with that name, did a further analysis, and basically dark social is just more Facebook. It's just more Facebook. I don't know what the Star Wars metaphor would be, like if you remove the mask and underneath is another mask of the same mask, and then underneath that's another mask of the same mask. So much so that this year Facebook experimented with putting a satire tag on articles that were from places like The Onion and other places that say things that are not strictly speaking true. In part because, again, we're in the context of no context. If you have no idea it's just another link on Facebook. If you just see the headline, you may think it's completely accurate. This is a larger problem that existed with the web as well. I will confess, when I got to speak on Bloomberg Television about this decision a few months ago, and I called my mom, because you call your mom when you're going to be on television, and I said, hey, this is what I'm going to do, you should tune in if you want, and she said, oh, what's it about? And I explained, and I said, like some people who don't know what The Onion is, and my mother said, I don't know what The Onion is. So I should maybe just put a satire tag on a lot of stuff. This year with Twitter really, I think, matured as a service, even though it was having a really rough year as a company. It continued to churn through new product leads. The growth levels were not as strong as investors were hoping. It just sort of seems to be a confused company that isn't quite sure what it is. But at the same time, this year, if you look back, this was a year when you really solidified Twitter's role in social justice movements, it is where the mob convenes, the mob for good and the mob for ill. You can think of it, things like Ferguson. You can also think of things like our friends at Gamergate, who just came out today. I don't know if you saw it's about ethics in gaming journalism, in case you're wondering what it's about. And things like Gamergate, it really showed the power of these communities to convene. And while they use it in a lot of platforms, including Reddit very prominently for them, Twitter was really even more so than before, the heartbeat of the conversation about news today. So it's kind of sad that their company seems a little bit rudderless. I don't know if you saw today, Gawker Media, Capital New York had a report saying that Gawker lost 7 figures in income from Gamergate's attack on their advertisers in the middle of all that nonsense. One way that Twitter is evolving is through bots and automated services. This is one that for all of us who were watching the World Cup this summer, who were doing that when we should have been doing our actual paid work, but we're instead streaming things on our phone or on our computers. This was a Twitter bot called Replay Last Goal that actually was beautiful in its simplicity. It identified a European national public broadcaster that was streaming all the games live online, essentially created a fake server in that country so they could get access to this. Then found a Twitter account that was automatically tweeting whenever a goal was scored. It was caching a minute's worth of video from each game. Whenever it noticed that a goal had been scored, it would then go back and gather up automatically, no humans involved in this process, video of the goal, tweet it out, make an animated GIF out of it. All of this happening with no real human intervention. And it really raises a lot of interesting intellectual property issues because FIFA shut them the hell down because they have no interest in this sort of material getting out there without you paying many billions of dollars in rights fees. But as we see more and more bots coming forward, that more and more things that can automatically generate what you need and what you want at any given moment, I think that's going to be a big part of increasing Twitter's value. Another thing we really saw this year was a new appreciation of chat apps, something that had been of course, chatting on your phones is not a new activity, but nonetheless, you saw them really being exposed as engines for quite a bit of traffic. We did a story getting some data from a Spanish website that found that in a lot of cases, the WhatsApp button on their mobile web view was being used significantly more than the Facebook or the Twitter or the Google Plus, for God's sakes, button, and was actually generating significantly more traffic. When you think about when someone shares something on Facebook or Twitter, they're at least theoretically sharing it for an audience of a significant number of people. Most sharing on a platform like WhatsApp is one-to-one. But nonetheless, the value of that traffic was such that it was outnumbering Facebook in a lot of cases. We, every year at the Nieman Lab, run a series of predictions for the next year. That starts on Monday, if you're interested in going to niemanlab.org, but I'll give you a sneak peek of one that will be in there. This is from Jamie Mottram, who is at USA Today Sports, who runs For the Win, which is their viral sports site. And he said that his prediction for next year was that everyone's going to start adding SMS share buttons to their content. They replaced a Twitter button with an SMS button, and again, it's used 3 to 4 times as often. So there's a weird way in which social media has been viewed by news organizations as a version of the old broadcast form media that we always had. It's all about performing for an audience, right? But these chat apps really show, and it will differ from country to country and environment to environment, but they show that direct sharing is smaller in number, but significantly more powerful in a lot of cases because you will take that direct notice from your friend significantly better than the 10,000 tweets in your stream. The rise of social has also meant that a lot of news organizations thought about their homepages in different ways. Quartz decided to change their homepage to represent a daily briefing. Vox and The Guardian both tried clustering by subject in ways that were kind of interesting. It's easy to talk about the death of the homepage, and lots of people who write stories on the internet talk about that quite a bit. But even Vox Media still gets about 30 to 35% of its visits from someone going to the homepage. We can always talk about how people come in on links on Twitter or links on Facebook, and that's disproportionately true for the people in this room, but it's not true for everybody yet, and homepages do still matter. And the last thing on this point, we had lots of interesting debates this year about what is clickbait. How do you define what clickbait is? Because no one wants to say, have a definition that includes anything positive that they like. Clickbait has to be shunned. It has to be sent away. It has to be hidden in the attic. There are lots of debates when BuzzFeed's Ben Smith came forward and said that he did not think that what BuzzFeed did qualified as clickbait. Others disagree with that. Is clickbait content that makes a promise that it doesn't fulfill, like a headline that essentially promises something and then the story doesn't meet it? Is it just sort of content that you find beneath your audience, or is it content you don't like producing yourself? I think the further debates about what exactly is clickbait are going to be fairly important for going forward. Lastly, let's talk about a few business models. Big trend this year, native advertising. This is David Ogilvy. This is a line from Confessions of an Advertising Man from 1962 or so, I forget. Mad Men era, I think you're required to say when you discuss anything involving advertising in the 1960s. This is what there's no need for advertisements to look like advertisements. If you make them look like editorial pages, you'll attract about 50% more readers. You might think the public would resent this trick. There's no evidence to suggest that they do. This was really the year that native advertising went mainstream. It was no longer just something that the BuzzFeeds of the world were doing. It was something that the New York Times was doing, and the Wall Street Journal was doing, and the Washington Post were doing. It really has moved. It's in the big tent now. That leads to a whole host of questions. Journalists continue to hate it, even though native advertising generates much higher levels of revenue than most other forms of advertising. It's here, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So I think it's important for journalists and people who care about this stuff to really be vigilant about making sure that things are clearly labeled and that advertising and editorial content are distinguished appropriately. I have a big question that I'll be curious about the next year. Is I really wonder, even though projections for native advertising just are a giant swooping asymptotic curve, I kind of wonder if there's going to be a bubble in native advertising. It is a place where a lot of money is going. I kind of wonder if a lot of folks who are paying a lot of money for it are going to realize not many people read any of these things. But maybe that's just my inner skeptic. We also saw the rise of duck-billed platypuses this year. Platypi? No. A platyshire? Okay, this is another shaming question. Raise your hand if you know what a platyshire is. You are the ones, if you're not raising your hand, you're very lucky. You don't live in my world. You're sort of my people, but you don't live in my world. Platyshire is a term that was invented in February. It's actually a fairly useful term, which is why I'm willing to put a picture of a half mammal, half duck on the screen for you. Platyshire is meant to be an organization that is a combination of a platform and a publisher. So think of Gawker Media. They have reporters who write things, but they also have the audience who writes things, and the idea is that the content is supposed to be both first-class citizens, wherever it's coming from. Medium is a great example of this. Any one of you could go write a post on Medium, but Medium also pays pretty good money to professional journalists to write content, and it's really hard to tell the difference between the stuff that got paid 10 grand for and the stuff that was written by a crazy person. The idea here is that you have the veneer of the really quality stuff, and that sort of adds a certain amount of gravitas and grandeur to the rest of this stuff. And you've seen a number of places that have really pursued this. BuzzFeed, of course, does this with the BuzzFeed community model as well. There are a lot of problems with this model, which is almost like clockwork. Every time you open this platform up to everyone, people will go post incredibly terrible, racist, anti-Semitic, just the worst things. Think of the worst of humanity, and they're almost certainly writing on Medium. And this is a real challenge, particularly since the model for making money for most of these is native advertising. So that's all about brand equity, and we'll see if they can continue to build it up. Just yesterday, I was looking at Medium was forced to take down a post by someone who was basically calling for the mass murder of all women because women are terrible. And, these sorts of things happen, and that's the challenge of being a platyshire. I will not speak that word again tonight. Not really an innovation, but this is the year that Texas Tribune turned 5. Texas Tribune is the most successful local nonprofit news site in America by some margin. They have a team of over a dozen journalists who cover the State House, who do really terrific work. They've built a sustainable revenue model that generates over $5 million a year. They're really quite tremendous. The unfortunate flip side of this is that most local nonprofit news sites have not had their success. We're seeing a lot of struggling from a lot of places that may have some fine journalistic instincts but don't have the business mindset or the revenue possibilities, or who are doing good work but really have struggled terribly to find an audience for that work. So I think if we could look back on 2015, at the end, a year from now, I think we'll probably see there will be some blood on the floor there. We heard earlier about De Correspondent, the Dutch site that is crowdfunded. This was a big year for the Netherlands. It really was. Not just in soccer. It was a really big year for news sites in the Netherlands. You had De Correspondent, you had Blindel, which is a new startup that is aiming to be the iTunes for news that people have been talking about, and I have been discounting for a long time. NRCQ, all across Scandinavia, a lot of interesting stuff. We're really starting to see a shift away from the United States being the country that has the most disrupted media system and therefore the most interesting stuff going on. We're now seeing places often where there are smaller language communities, where there's not that much going on in Swedish, or there's not that much going on in Dutch. That's meant that media companies that have resources have been able to do interesting things. So keep looking to our Dutch friends. We saw Vox.com launch and debut this year. Lots you could say about Vox.com, but the one thing I want to point out is that they launched it from the initial hiring of Ezra Klein and the start of the process to the debut was only about 9 weeks. That's a pretty tremendous startup time for a news organization. When MVP in this case does not mean most valuable player, does not mean Madison Bumgarner, it in fact means minimum viable product, a very common term that I'm sure these people have heard way too much of in the past 18 months or so. We're really starting to see, this is a good example of that sort of DNA getting into the news business. You do have on the downside sites like the Gun Crisis Project in Philadelphia and Homicide Watch in DC, crime projects that were very lauded and did a lot of good work, to basically go out of business or curtail their work. There's a lot of money being pumped into the news business from a venture capital perspective right now, but the funding is far from universal. Almost done, I promise. The New Yorker did a big redesign this year, which again, there are lots of interesting things that you could talk about, switching to a metered paywall model. What I think is kind of maybe the most interesting to me is that they decided not to have premium content, the long pieces from the magazine, the archives of John McPhee as one kind of content, and the relatively quickie blog post as a different kind of content. The way their meter works is if you read 7 20,000 epics about granite from the archives, or whether you read 7 short blog posts about the day's news, that they both trigger the paywall in the same way. The idea that the New Yorker would value those kinds of content equally is kind of an interesting move. We heard about Serial earlier. I don't know if you saw this. This may have been after you were getting ready to come over here, but Best Buy, I don't know if you listen to Serial, but Best Buy tweeted something today saying, Best Buy should never tweet. Best Buy should never tweet about murder. That's the thing they should not do. If you listen to the show, a big element is whether there's a payphone at this Best Buy where this murder allegedly happened. And Best Buy tweeted something to the effect today of, Best Buy, your source for everything except payphones, #Serial. Which is terrible. Like record time from tweet to apology for tweet. Just, they say the news cycle is shortening, and I think we can see that here. But this year did really mark the 19,348th time that someone said podcasts are really booming. They seem to boom every few months or so, but in this year I think we really did see a significant increase in the mainstream attention being paid to podcasting, which opens up a lot of potential. The last thing I will say, a final challenge to you, since it's rare that I get to speak to a group of people who have thought about these issues and know as much about these issues as you do. And I have a piece about this coming out tomorrow, so you can read it or I can just tell it to you in 30 seconds. One thing that I've noticed is that there's so much interesting stuff going on in the news world, so much interesting innovation, so many new startups, new products, new projects, new technologies. And they are all really great for the kind of people who come to events like this. I think we're really seeing a growing gap between a news upper class that knows about all the tools, knows about all the platforms, knows about all the sites, and knows how to and wants to use them, and the broad masses for whom Facebook is the entire internet. In an era when everyone read the same newspapers, everyone is in quotation marks there, when everyone read the same newspapers and everyone watched Dan Rather or Peter Jennings or Walter Cronkite, there was a certain unity to the news consumption experience. And I think that you see that mostly through local TV news. Local TV news is still today, in 2014, the #1 way that Americans get their news. Local TV news is not something I ever watch. I don't know if that's true for anyone else in this room. If local TV news is on in my house, that means there was a sporting event and it ended and we did not change the channel in time. That's all that means. But nonetheless, I just want us to, there's a parting thought, think about all the energy that goes into creating these amazing new tools, and think, how are you going to create those tools and those platforms and those experiences in such a way that they are low friction enough, that they are easy enough, that the user experience is good enough, that the kind of people who just want to watch 30 minutes of local television news, that they're going to get their news that way. Because I really do worry about that growing gap. We have the most, if you are interested in a subject, there is more information for you than ever before in human history. But there's a big gap between those people and everybody else. And so I would love it if we spent 2015 thinking about products for the everybody else. That's all I got.
Okay, you got to give me 2 more minutes for thanks, and then we're done. First of all, Josh Benton, great job. I'm so glad you agreed to do this because I really think you probably know more about this subject than anybody in the world. I try to follow the same things that Josh was talking to you about tonight. I try to follow myself and understand, and I put them in my Twitter feed, and I know when Josh is excited about something, I should understand it, and when he's skeptical about something, then I have to kind of question it. So it's great to have you here as a fellow traveler in this field. So thank you. Secondly, there's a lot of people here who supported our students, whether you're their parents, which is one kind of support, or you are partners they work with in their projects, or your friends, or there's people here who came to speak to our students this year. All of you are participants in this learning project of ours, and I really want to thank you hugely for your contributions. And then finally, to these students who are graduating, you guys did amazing tonight. You like blew me away. And I have to say goodbye to you, so that's a little bit sad, but just the way that you put everything together, the way you improved your presentations from 48 hours ago when they sucked to now. And as I was listening to you, I realized that every one of you was testing some big idea, something huge. And no matter how modest your results were, the fact that you put yourselves out there and risked your ideas is hugely inspiring to me. So that's what this program is about. And next year we'll do it again. I hope you'll come if you're invited. We're adjourned.